Hi, I'm George Nordhaus. Welcome to Monday morning. We're going to take a big leap today to a theory or a system, or I'm not quite sure what, but frankly, I'm sure it'll tell us, of predictive modeling. I've heard so much about it. And it's coming, and people who are into the underwriting and pricing, as you can see the title, really are up on this, and they're going to be a lot more up on it. But as agents, we really have to understand it too, because that's the way of the future. Frank Benaccio is a guy who's, well, he's been around a long time. He's been around 25 years or more. He owned an agency. He now runs Oceanus Partners, excuse me. That's a consulting firm. He's works with a lot of different areas, but workers' compensation is his. I don't know if it's was that your major, Frank? Workers' compensation.
We call it our flagship offering, George, for reasons that just spent a lot of time working in that space. So we're across the broad spectrum, but certainly leading with workers' compensation is our flagship.
Well, all right. Well, let's talk about predictive modeling. I never really came across it until the last year or so, and now I'm kind of wondering, what's your objective?
Well, we have a couple of objectives today for your listeners, is to really take on predictive modeling. Now, we're going to take it on in the underwriting and pricing side. There's a lot of predictive modeling that's also going on in the claim side. That's a topic for another day, George, but we're going to talk about how insurance companies, individual insurance companies today have the power, and we'll talk about what's precipitated all of this, to essentially use their own predictive models to better select certain risks and to better price those risks. And agents are already seeing the impact of this. They're somewhat befuddled, sometimes aggravated, frustrated, annoyed. They're kicking desks, and we want to help them get out in front of these changes because we're still in the relatively early stages of how predictive modeling at the individual carrier level is being rolled out, but we want to help agents get out in front of it and to help them begin to change their conversations.
Yeah, my guess is if I ask 100 agents about predictive modeling, I would get a very high percentage of answering what it is.
Well, and they're frustrated because they see sometimes the output of it, and they really don't understand it. So perhaps we can begin that process to help them understand it today. And we're going to start with workers' compensation, George. And because in workers' compensation, we've had this thing for, going back to the 1930s and 40s, known as the experience modification factor, which of course arises out of something called the experience rating plan. And this is an example we're today going to look back in retrospect and call it a crude example of predictive modeling, because the rating bureaus have, and their actuaries, have put together the experience mod. We're going to do a brief review of the experience mod and experience rating just to make sure everybody starts on the same page, and then we'll move into why the impact and the influence of the experience mod is eroding. So is that on track with where you wanted to go, George?
Exactly. I need to learn.
Okay. Well, let's first just make sure we're all on the same page. We're the National Council of Compensation Insurance, which has jurisdiction over, I think it's 38 states or so. We have the California Rating Bureau, the New York, and a few others. But they're all pretty much in agreement when they suggest that, or when they explain experience rating as using an employer's past experience to project future losses. This is the exact opposite, George, of the mutual fund ads you hear where they say past performance is not an indicator of future performance. Well, with experience rating, what the rating bureaus and the actuaries assert is that past experience is a predictor of future experience. And the idea here is, and the theory behind it is, we want to use individual experience of an individual employer to tailor the cost to that employer, reward the employers that are having better experience, and to charge more if the plan works as described. An employer with a higher experience mod is likely going to have greater losses in the coming policy period, so the carrier needs more money for that. That's the whole theory. Let's tailor it to an individual risk. Let's make individual risk pricing a way in which insurance carriers, the experience mod is intended to be a tool for insurance companies to help price risks. And it's meant to be a predictor of the future. So Tony DiDonato probably said it best. He's one of the head actuaries at NCCI, actually based here in Florida, where I'm from, where he said the experience rating is intended to be a predictive indicator of future losses. So that's the whole basis. We're trying to predict the future. And as Yogi Berra said, the great philosopher, said, the prediction is difficult, especially about the future. So there's inherent challenges right out of the box. The rating bureaus, George, use not the most recent policy period in experience rating, but then 3 policy periods back from that. So you can see that anybody who renewed their work comp policy here in 2015, and as we put this program together, we're running out of 2015, but the policy period, the policy data, which is payrolls and claims for 2014 policy, was not included in that renewal, but the data, the payroll and loss information from 13, 12, and 11 were. And we're going to circle back around on whether that's a good idea or not as we move forward. It has served us well for many years, but perhaps it's becoming antiquated, and there's better ways to do it. In theory, things are moving faster. Businesses are oftentimes not even the same type of business today that they were 4 years ago. There's very different types of operations, different types of automation, on and on. So in theory, and you'll notice I say in theory, if someone has standard premium of $200,000 in workers' compensation premium, in theory, if they have a 1.0 mod, their standard premium is going to be $200,000.
Right.
If they have a 135, obviously, let's do the math. This is all third grade math. $270,000, and if they have a 0.75, $150 instead of $200,000. This is where, gosh, for decades we were able to go to employers and say, I'm going to help you drive down your experience mod, which will drive down your cost. That is not necessarily true anymore. Maybe it's true, but it's not necessarily true. As we often say, George, one of our favorite expressions around here, a broken clock is right twice a day. So you may be right, but it's very, in our view, my partner Susan Toussaint and I assert very clearly that it is slightly disingenuous today to assert that if I help you drive down your mod, I'm going to drive down your cost. That may or may not be true, and we're going to talk about why as we move forward.
Good.
So the question is experience rating plan becoming obsolete? And let's take a look at why that may be the case. Now, virtually anybody who has a pulse is familiar with the term big data and predictive analytics, and we see it in our everyday life. If you're a subscriber to Netflix, if you're on Amazon.com, if you're on Facebook, if you use Google, I mean Airbnb, Uber, you name it, all of these businesses have arisen out of the use of predictive analytics. It's sometimes almost creepy that you go on Amazon.com and because of the last 3 books you bought, they predict that you would like the following 6 books, and doggone it, they're very accurate with that, and they do an incredible job. And Netflix the same way. You've watched this, you're likely going to want to watch this, and they're pretty accurate, and they're using big data analytics. So what we're seeing is that this has come into the insurance industry. Typically the insurance industry is known as, well, this old mature business that doesn't change a whole lot. Well, folks, we are now in the midst of the most significant change. The early stages probably is better stated. In the early stages of the most significant change in the insurance industry, at least in the past 50 years. And that's because we are now entering an era where the individual insurers don't have to rely on the National Council of Compensation Insurance or other rating bureaus around the country, because they can now build their own predictive models. The experience rating plan, the experience mod, is intended to be a predictive indicator of future losses. Well, the carriers now, and I'm going to share why in just a moment, George, they have the ability to do it themselves and to do it better in a far more sophisticated manner. So let's begin to drill down on that. They get to, first of all, they're leveraging their own data. So they're very specific about being able to leverage their own data. Now, what's driving this? Well, it's these huge databases, these enormous, we keep hearing about, by golly, my sister bought her grandson a laptop for high school, and it had a terabyte of data storage on an $800 laptop. We're going to look, data storage used to be expensive. You may recall, George, when we bought our first PCs, the hard drives were in megabytes, and to go from 100 to 250 was very expensive in megabytes. Well, we're going to talk about how the data storage in these huge databases, as well as computing power, just the processing power, has gotten far less expensive. And now you can buy data of all different sorts and kinds that you didn't used to have access to. There's companies in business today that are in business to simply collect and aggregate data so they can resell the data. And we're getting data sets that are literally in the hundreds, and we'll talk about that momentarily. So we have this incredible explosion of huge databases, this dramatic reduction in cost in computing power and storage, which is probably the biggest driver, and we have these brilliant people coming out of the best schools in America, Harvard Business School, Wharton, Stanford, MIT, and they're building these algorithms in order to create these predictive indicators. Now, this is probably one of the biggest changes. Look at this, George. Back in 1981, if we could jump in a time machine with our thumb drive, we would be very wealthy today. Because back in 1981, the cost per gigabyte of hard drive storage was $700,000 per gigabyte. No wonder each individual carrier could not afford to do data mining and data analytics, thus predictive modeling. But as you come down to the spring of 2014, in the lower right-hand corner, it came down to 3 cents, and the latest indicators I'm seeing, it looks like it's about a penny a gigabyte.
Unbelievable.
From 700,000 to a penny. So certainly back in 1981, you needed the economies of scale of a rating bureau to crunch all this data. Each individual carrier is just too doggone costly. For all practical purposes today, George, data storage is free.
Wow.
Virtually free. You can't get much below a penny. And you may have even noticed, George, if you're an Amazon Prime member, you probably got an email from them and say, you know what, we'll give you unlimited storage in the cloud for all your pictures and everything you want. Just load it up into the cloud for being a Prime member. It's just because for all practical purposes, it costs them nothing. Cost them nothing to offer you that benefit. So by virtue of having data storage practically be free, and I just kind of reemphasize it on this next slide, we have data sets where an underwriter used to look at 6 to 8 data points, George. Now this particular point comes directly from, I won't mention the name of the huge actuarial firm, but everybody would know him, and I happened to meet him at a conference. And he said, Frank, he said, we underwriters used to have 6 to 8 data points, loss ratio, location, maybe a little bit about management experience, certainly class of business, and a little bit about their operation. They are now using predictive models that have built into them upwards of 600 to 800 data points. Now, don't ask me, George, to tell you all those data points. First, I don't know. Secondly, they're spending millions, if not tens of millions of dollars to build these models, so they're not going to tell everybody what's in the black box. But we do know that a greater amount of data aggregation is coming to the carriers to be used, and I'm going to drill down on what some of that looks like here in just a few moments. But what's happening now is that they can process, because of the computing power and because of the size of the databases, they can process millions of calculations and either validate or invalidate their models. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit to make a point, almost on a daily basis. So if it appears something is not working, they can adjust on the fly. Now think about experience rating. You have to wait a year, 2, 3 years for that data to move off before anything really changes. Carriers can now adjust on the fly. And in essence, this is what they're doing. And folks out, if you've not seen the movie Moneyball, you don't have to be a baseball fan to enjoy it. But if you haven't seen it, I would recommend you watch it, if for no other reason, to get a better understanding of what predictive analytics is all about. I'm not here to do a movie review. It is a great movie. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the book 10 years before the movie came out. But what you can learn,
because all of a sudden it changed the, well, I don't want to get in your, but holy mackerel, I just didn't realize that those statistics were available.
And so it's if you certainly it changed the whole game. And as a baseball fan, you know what Billy Beane did, and folks can go and see the movie, but go and look at it in terms of not how great looking Brad Pitt is, but the fact that how they use data analytics and pay very, very close. You don't have to pay that close of attention. They kind of hit you in the head with it. But you can learn a lot about predictive analytics in this movie, and then think about it in terms of how that could impact insurance, because the insurers are now playing Moneyball. And I'm going to give some examples of how they're doing that here momentarily, George. Anything you would want a little clarity on at this point, George, or do you want me to keep barreling ahead here?
No, barrel. It's all piling up, Alex. But I think it's fabulous what you're talking about here, because it puts things in such a good perspective to those of us who've been in for a long, long time and had no idea this was all happening. I didn't. I guess.
Well, and it's happening around us, and we see this. Towers Watson, fortunately, does a predictive modeling benchmarking survey every year. They've just completed the 5th year, and as you'll notice, in 2013, 47% of work comp carriers were using predictive modeling, but look at the next number to the right of that, 41% plan to. That brings us to 88%. For all practical purposes, that means virtually everybody's going to be using predictive modeling in workers' compensation. It's being used across the board. Again, this comes from Towers Watson. We need to give them attribution for the work, and you can see it keeps increasing every year. Work comp has been one of the leaders on the commercial side. Personal lines has been using it in personal auto and homeowners for quite a while, but in the commercial side, work comp is the leader with respect to 47% of the companies, and growing and moving. In essence, what we're finding is that the carriers that are not doing it are very concerned, because who's going to get adverse selected against? They're going to be the folks that don't have the sophisticated models to better select the risks and better price the risks, because as many CEOs say today, George, data and the way in which you gather it, the way in which you analyze it, how you select it, and how you analyze it is likely your sustainable competitive advantage moving forward. And if you don't believe that to be true, I mean, look at what carriers have been facing for the past 7 to 8 years. They've been facing anemic economic growth. 2% is not what anybody really looked at as a big thing, but of course it all looks good coming out of 08 and 09 and 2010. Their interest rates for their investment income have been abysmal. They've had virtually no investment income on fixed rate instruments or safe instruments over the past 7 years. So where are they going to compete? They're going to compete by using data analytics to better select the right risks and price them right. And again, I'll give you some examples as to how just a little bit of that's going to get played out. But what we want to share here to the agent and the insurance agency community is, folks, the toothpaste is out of the tube. It's not going back. More and more companies are using this, and we're not suggesting that it's perfect by any means, but this experience rating versus predictive analytics, I'm betting on the side of predictive analytics being the winner. And it's largely because they can handle so much more data, past and present and immediate. In addition, the data can go way beyond what the experience mod data that's used. Experience mods, they use payroll and losses. Sure, they put some other little things in a formula that would just bore everybody to tears to talk about, but they're not really taking into account so many different aspects. What's the legal and medical community like in Miami, Florida versus Tampa, Florida versus Jacksonville, Florida versus Pensacola, Florida? Is it all the same? No, it's not all the same. What about rural areas versus metro areas? We could keep going on down the list, but predictive modeling is far more nimble, far more flexible. They can change on a dime. And what we really want to do is talk to underwriters about changes in operations, and underwriters can use that or other individual risk factors that change the risk even inside a specific class. Let me drill down on some of this, George, so that folks can perhaps really grasp what's going on here. I already mentioned that it's far more responsive. So look at my home state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
You go from Key West to Pensacola. There are enormous demographic differences. I'm on the west central part in the Tampa Bay area. Very different environment than Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami down in the southeast coast. That's almost a different country, let alone a different state. And Florida has a lot of rural area. Now we have the rating bureaus sharing with us an advisory loss cost, or a premium rate as it is in Florida. In the experience rating, they give us an expected loss rate per class code. Now think about this. One expected loss rate per class code, George. But let's take a look. As we drill down on that and we thin slice that class code, we have one expected loss rate per class code, but that 8380 class code applies to a franchised auto dealer, a Jiffy Lube, a tire dealer, and a good old-fashioned 4-bay garage. Now think about this for a moment. The same expected losses per $100 of payroll apply to the franchised auto dealer technician making $150,000 a year in Miami, Florida, and the Jiffy Lube guy making $8 to $10 an hour standing in a hole all day with his arms above his head, and the tire guy, which is one of the toughest jobs I've ever witnessed, hustling tires on and off of vehicles and on and off balancing machines all day, and a 2-bay garage. Now, who's more likely going to want to either avoid getting hurt, work more safely, be better trained, and be motivated to get back to work? The franchised auto dealer technician making 150 grand, or the Jiffy Lube guy making $10 an hour standing in a hole all day with his arms above his head?
Hope you're not asking me, because I think it's pretty obvious.
Yes, but the expected loss rate does not differentiate between the two. But predictive modeling can differentiate between the two, not only because it's the same class code. Inside that same class code, there are dramatically different activities, dramatically demographics in the area where these operations are based, dramatically different types of people, dramatically different skill levels. I'm not throwing stones at anybody, George. We've just evolved. We just have power and capabilities today that we've never had. And I say we as the collective we, basically insurance carriers. And they've done very smart, they're doing very smart things. They're being exceedingly bright about what they're doing. And what all this is leading to is they're pushing through their model and coming up with the price that they want. Then they're backing it into the premium algorithm in the experience mod. Let me say that again, because I think that's a really important point. They're coming up with their price down to lower size accounts, like 25, 30,000 in premium by some carriers. By the way, side note, George, you and I both know this has been done at the $1 million premium level for a long time. What we're really talking about is that what has been done at the $1 million and $2 million premium level is now down in the $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 premium level, because of the power of big, huge database, the virtually free data storage and processing power. So they're essentially coming up with the price and go, okay, let's see what the rating bureaus say the advisory rate is, and oh, let's see what that mod is. We got to back into that. And everybody gets all up in arms. Go ahead, George. I'm sorry. What was that?
Thinking about it, when I was thinking back to that Ford thing, it seems to me they would have more divisions within the automobile. I mean, as things go further, more, what was the classifications or
different class codes? You would think so, right? I mean, but it takes, I don't know how many years to even get a different additional class code added. And even then, it probably will be, by the time they get one added, it'll be somewhat antiquated. And carriers are, because of the free data storage, I call it free. It's for all practical purposes, George, it's free. And because of the computer processing power, and because of the They call them quants, Quants, these brilliant people coming out of these incredible business schools that if they don't go to Wall Street to do data analytics, the insurance industry or the big consulting firms, and we know the names, Milliman, Deloitte, McKinsey, Towers, we don't know what the deal is going to be with Towers, Watson, and Willis as that thing's in flux, but these are brilliant folks. These are very, very intelligent people doing some extraordinary work on behalf of insurance companies. Insurance companies may actually be bringing these quants right on staff as well. Certainly, probably some of the nationals are considering that, if not doing so. But some of the brightest minds in the country are taking this on in the insurance industry and, of course, other industries as well. Well, what does all this mean to an agent that has an experience mod go down, but the net cost or premium either stay the same or go up? You got to be prepared to have that conversation, George, especially if you've been selling to the prospect, which is now your client, for the last 2 to 3 years. Let's get your mod down and your price will go down. The mod could go down 30 points over a 3-year period, and the price may not go down at all because perhaps the underwriter, through the predictive model, had already baked in the cake a 30% lower price 3 years ago.
Fascinating. Wow.
So we have to be prepared today to just look. And George, I will own that I've been training agents now for going on 15 years. I've been an agent. I call myself a recovering agent. I was an agent for 25 years. I've since sold my agency and do consulting and training and coaching full time now. But I used to train agents and say, help people drive down their experience mod and their premiums will go down. That is no longer the case. We cannot say that anymore. We should not say that anymore. Possibly that might happen, but there's no direct relationship anymore. Why do you think insurance companies have 5 different loss cost multipliers in just about every state, 4 or 5 different loss cost multipliers, so that they can range that advisory rate upwards of 200%? So, and they've just got the power to really leverage that. So what does all this mean to me? You know, oh, by the way, before I go there, one more point. This is going to make agents spontaneously have their hair catch on fire. They may actually get a non-renewal or not even offer a quote because maybe the predictive model is given a number that the underwriter just can't get to. Even by, scheduled debits and credits are supposed to be fine-tuning mechanisms, but they go to their biggest loss cost multiplier, they adjust with their scheduled credits, in this case it'd probably be scheduled debits, and they go, I just can't even get to the price I need to get to that my model says, and they non-renew an account that, maybe seems like it's marginal, but not a dead dog loser to get non-renewed, or maybe not even be offered a proposal, a quote at all, because the underwriter can't get to the price they need to get to. What does all this mean? Agents have to change the conversation. Get out in front, start having different conversations with employers, and stop saying we're going to help to drive your mod down and that's going to drive your premium down. It may or it may not, and more cases than not, it's having less and less relevance for the reasons that I've mentioned. So we have to establish much better benchmarks. We have to craft a story and talk about, look, employers are smart people. They see this happening all around them. They're on Amazon.com. They're on Netflix. They use Google and Facebook. Let's talk about how it's influencing the insurance industry. And let's talk about how data analytics are changing the way in which an employer needs to look at buying insurance and managing risk. Because I can assure you of this, George, the predictive models do not reward constant bidding and quoting. I don't have to be an MIT or a Wharton School graduate to know that changing carriers and bidding and quoting every year is not going to be looked favorably upon from the predictive models. And nobody has let me look inside the black box, but I've had some conversations, and certainly that is the case among many other things that employers demand agents do and that agents do that is actually hurting them in a data analytical world, not helping them.
We're really talking about, this is, if there was a commoditization, I don't know you feel there is in workers' comp, and as these various organizations go on the internet with the commercial lines things, not like the Geico's, et cetera, this could remove commoditization. There's just no way that I don't see automatically that commoditizer can understand all this, compete with it. I mean, you got to have somebody there doing it, I would think. I don't know. Am I right or wrong? I mean,
well, I think you're going to find that in the very, very small stuff, which I don't believe agents should be in anyhow. Some people may criticize me for saying, a single location restaurant. Come on, really? Just last week, you had Warren Buffett announce that Berkshire Hathaway is going to go direct employers on all 50 states. You had Intuit, who has QuickBooks, and QuickBooks has payroll. They're going to go direct employer in all 50 states. Now, the high hazard complex accounts, I don't believe are likely going to go direct with Berkshire Hathaway or with QuickBooks or with ADP or with Paychex. If there's complexity and hazard, they need an agent. But folks, agents need to ask themselves the question, if there's not complexity or high hazard here, and it's a very low risk, look, a flower shop, a single location restaurant, a single location hardware or food store, there's not a lot of complexity there. There's a lot of frequency with very little severity, and I don't know that agents have a fit for that. It's kind of like the difference between a travel agent that's going to book you a trip to have a camping trip in the shadow of the pyramids versus hopping a flight to New York. Nobody uses a travel agent to hop a flight to New York anymore, but if they're going to go down the Amazon River, or they're going to go to Egypt, or they're going to go want some specialty, what they even call themselves now, outfitters, they're going to go to a travel agent. We believe at Oceanus Partners that agents must differentiate by going upstream, higher hazard, larger accounts, more at risk, and greater complexity, because what we see happening, who would have thought even a year ago that $500 million would be invested by a private equity firm to go and take out group health policies, and they're already at $1 billion in premium in just over a year, and that company's called Zenefits. Who would have thought? They're selling it over the telephone.
Yeah, it's scary. Let me ask, do you think, all told, would you think that predictive modeling is a threat to the independent agent or an asset?
Great question, because I think it's exactly the opposite. I think it's an extraordinary opportunity because it will change the way in which people have conversations. It's not because here's the really important takeaway too, George, and that is, underwriters aren't going away. Underwriters are still going to be able to use their intuition and to use their experience to make exceptions or to shift the model. Now, I can promise you this, you know who's at risk? You know who's at threat? Is the folks that do treat this business as a commodity. And October 1st, which wasn't that very long ago, they spit out 15 different submissions to their agency management system for one-run renewals, and they were crummy submissions, and they were incomplete submissions, and then they were inaccurate submissions, and the vast majority of submissions that go out in our industry are horrible. I've got that directly from underwriters. Those folks are at risk. But those agents that want to get really, really good at better communicating the risk and helping to improve the risk profile, shopping and bidding and quoting, folks, is hurting employers, and especially when you're doing it with lousy submissions. So where's the opportunity? The opportunity is for those agents that are going to better understand the risks, they're going to help improve the risks, and they're going to better communicate the risks. And that takes a lot of hard work. You don't just get to say, I'm big and bad, and I got markets, and I can beat up the underwriters, and I can get you a best price. Those folks are at risk, George. I will agree that those folks are at risk. The independent agents that are playing the I'm big and I'm bad, and I can throw down a bunch of quotes, and I can beat up underwriters, and I can get you pricing, they're at risk because that game is moved to another arena. They may not see it yet, but they're going to soon see, if they haven't already, that game is shifting to another stadium, and it's going to be played by agents that are going to have a different skill set and a different approach to leverage the power of predictive analytics, not be beat over the head with it.
I tell you, Frank, I've listened to a lot of presentations, and I have to tell you, I mean, thousands over these. This is an earth shaker. I know it's old hat to you and some other people, but it's not going to be to most people. And I know. Do you consult with agents or companies or who?
Yes, our primary clients are insurance agencies. We help them to attract the right fit prospects to get in there and have those first meetings, which is more difficult today than ever, George, because everybody's so overwhelmed and distracted and time starved. And to have the kinds of conversations that illuminate to employers, there's a whole different thing going on out here. And if you're not aware of it, your business is at risk. Sometimes, George, I think what we find, and we work with agents from California to Massachusetts, all across the country, and it's a great privilege and fun and honor to work with agents. Well, you've done it, it's fun, and it's interesting. And I think we're at a time now that I've never been more excited because of the acceleration of change that's going on. It's dramatic, and it's keeping everybody on their toes. So what we're finding in working with agents, we also work with a couple of smaller regional insurance companies, but we work with them on behalf of how to help make their agents better. Sometimes we lose track of this. There's a lot of talk out there about say this and do this and say that and do this. The biggest issue that we feel is out there that doesn't get discussed enough is that businesses, their employees, and their families are at significant risk and don't know it. And the processes that are being used to work with them are extraordinarily flawed and downright dangerous. And if this conversation is not being had, among another whole host of conversations that are not being had, and it's the same old, we got great markets and we can get you quotes, those employers, their employees, and everybody's family is at significant risk. And it's time to separate the wheat from the chaff, and let's get, the right people to step up and say, you know what? Employers are doing it wrong and we're leading them down a wrong path. The world has changed. Think of every other industry where there was an intermediary that has been disrupted. And it's our turn to be disrupted. But to go back to that very powerful, simple question that you asked, does predictive analytics and predictive modeling put agents at risk, or does it not put them at risk? And very clearly, if you're playing the old game, you're at risk. If you embrace it, get your arms around it, learn it, know how to have conversations, and leverage it, you will find success in this profession unlike anything you've ever imagined.
Oh man, that's a beautiful, beautiful ending, Frank. I thank you. Yeah, I feel so lucky because you came to us and you listened to Monday morning and you said, "Hey, I know what they need," and you came to us right out of the clear blue sky. You and I have never really met personally, and I feel so privileged to have you. And as you talk there, I'm just thinking down the line, we're going to have you do this, we're going to have you do that, if you will, because boy, you're a dynamo, and I really greatly appreciate that. And so we'll get this job. This goes out now, Frank, to over 100,000 people every week, if you can imagine. That's the biggest mailing list, I guess, in the industry, so as far as I know. And the number's even growing. Now, they don't all read it. I wish they did. That'd be a whole different thing. But at least you'll be out there with them, and I think that's a great thing. And so, and I would like to urge people, once again, to go back to the, you can see it on the left-hand side, probably, the menu of all the things that are on Monday Morning now, and of course on Agencies Online, and go back to the basics too, because that's another good thing. But we'll talk about that later. But look at it, feel it, taste it. Frank, great job. I'm looking forward to our future together. How's that?
I look forward to it, George. I've been a fan of yours. I know we are not personal friends, but certainly I've known your work for a long time, and it's an honor and a real privilege to have a conversation with you, and look forward to another one coming up down the road.
Oh, absolutely. And for the rest of you, I'll see you again next